It's Comic-Con week here in San Diego, unfortunately. You know, if there was any positive byproduct of the great communist Chinese Wuhan Kung Flu coronavirus of 2019, I would have to rate 2 years of no Comic-Con pretty highly on that list. Since it's an event that combines several groups of people for whom I have less than boundless affection, grown adults who read comic books, grown adults who dress up like superheroes, and people who travel cross-country, or overseas even, so they can spend 2 days of their life walking around in public in a freaking Ant-Man costume. Yes, I know we're supposed to call it cosplaying, but no. You're a grown-ass adult who is dressed up like a cartoon character. Or worse yet, you're a 240-pound woman who thought it was a good idea to walk the streets of my hometown in a Princess Leia metal bikini. So just as I'm not going to tell a man in a dress that he's living a psychologically well-adjusted life, I'm also not going to tailor my language to make you feel better about your weird little fetish. Would it be more convenient to say cosplayer? Sure, I suppose it would, but this is a case where I am willing to inconvenience myself in order to emphasize the point. So I will happily take the extra time to call you grown adult who dresses up like a goddamn cartoon character. I think this year's Comic-Con attendees, the out-of-towners at any rate, the people who might not have been to San Diego since the last edition of the event back in 2019, could be in for a bit of a surprise, because it is very much woke Comic-Con now. COVID passports, mandatory face muzzles, contact tracing, the whole shooting match. They probably are even requiring preferred pronoun name tags too, for all I know. And for the record, my pronouns are Captain and Sir. But the changes, they noticed, will not be limited to inside the venue, for since the last edition of Comic-Con, San Diego has gone from being run by Republicans to being run by Democrats. With all of the wonderful effects that entails, I think you've heard that song enough times by now to remember the melody. Oh dear, I don't remember there being this many unconscious smack junkies and piles of human feces the last time we were here. It seems the local culture has changed a bit since our last visit, darling. If you're wondering, yes, I went to Comic-Con one time. I've also been to one auto race, one titty bar, and one casino. In all 4 cases, the friend who dragged me along was absolutely convinced I was going to love it and become an aficionado if I just went one time. Needless to say, that did not happen. Granted, the one time I went to Comic-Con, it was probably 25 years ago, when it was a very vastly different thing to what it is today. There was no Hollywood presence whatsoever. The only big brands were Marvel and DC, and the focus of the event was still very much on comic books. Imagine that. It was an event back then that was much more akin to a baseball card show, where you could pay a small fee, rent yourself a stall, set up your collection, and spend the day, buying and selling and trading and browsing other people's collections, and that's what most of the event was devoted to back before dinosaurs roamed the earth. You would see very few people walking around in costume, and the other people in attendance were in agreement that they were weirdos who were taking this stuff a bit too seriously. And though I didn't enjoy myself all that much because I am not a comic book collector, I could at least see the appeal of the event if you happen to be a person who is into that type of stuff. Today, from what I've seen and heard over the course of this century, Comic-Con has turned into just a loud, soulless, overpriced, overcrowded Hollywood studio trade show. And that is before the studios got all woke, so I can't even envisage how much more insufferable it's going to be now. And that's not even taking all the dumb COVID bullshit into account. But even back when I went that one time, which it had to have been 97 or 98, somewhere in there, there was one aspect of it that I found very deeply depressing. And it is a feature that still persists at that event and other events like it. And it's the spectacle of former minor celebrities all lined up in their dozens at their little rented tables, hawking autographs for whatever meager number of dollars they can fetch, signing 8x10 glossy headshots of themselves in some role they played on some TV show 30 or 40 or 50 years ago. After I saw the new Top Gun movie, I watched that Val Kilmer documentary on Amazon Prime because I had heard it was really good. But it seemed like half of the damn thing was just him doing the autograph signing drill. They drive him to some film festival or some comic book show, prop him up in a chair, and he scribbles autographs until he's unable to function and they have to drag him off to go take a nap somewhere. I had to stop watching because it was so incredibly sad. And not because I don't understand his and his family's motivations. He's a sick man. He's got big medical bills. He is unable to work regularly. So I guess the most reliable source of income he has is going to these fan convention things and signing pictures of Iceman and Doc Holliday and Jim Morrison until he can't hold the Sharpie anymore. But I am much more troubled by the people who are lining up to pay for those autographs. And I freely admit I am not an autograph guy. I have never really understood the appeal of it. There are only two men I would describe as childhood heroes of mine. I was lucky enough to meet and spend a bit of time with both of them. And it never would have occurred to me to ask for a picture or an autograph. It would have seemed awkward and rude to interrupt a perfectly good conversation just for some fanboy bullshit. The fact that I got to shake hands and have a chat for a few minutes with the two men I admire above all other public figures, that is the treasured memory I carry with me. An autograph or a picture would neither add to or detract from it. But when you're standing in a line, doing the equivalent of tossing a few coins into a dude's hat in return for 5 seconds of a scribble and a handshake or whatever, there's something I find very off-putting about that. Voyeuristic, even. I would never want to meet someone I admired in a setting like that. I would rather not meet them at all. And I guess I would be remiss in not telling you the two names. Tony Gwynn and Malcolm Young. But you probably could have deduced the second one from the fact that my intro riff is a slightly reworked version of High Voltage. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we cosplay by just wearing our normal everyday clothing, good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant, and since we last convened, there has been quite the roller coaster ride on the presidential health care front. First, during a very inspiring speech that he delivered Wednesday in front of a debris-strewn vacant lot in New Jersey, which, it has to be said, is a pretty fitting visual metaphor, President and semi-animated cadaver Joe Biden shocked the world with his announcement that because it rains motor oil in Delaware, he is currently suffering from cancer. And if you had told me 5 years ago that I would one day say the preceding sentence, non-ironically, as a literal description of something actually uttered in public by the leader of the free world, you know what I would have said? I would have said, come on, man, that would never happen. Not unless Joe Biden became president. Who the hell would vote for that idiot? Now, I'll grant you, I am not a qualified expert in Biden to English translation, so this is just my layman's interpretation of what the hell he was attempting to say, but I'm pretty sure he transitioned directly from my mom had to turn on the windshield wipers to get the oil off to, and that's why I and so many other people I know have cancer. And we knew this would get funnier by orders of magnitude once our good friend White House Press Secretary Baghdad Buckwheat got hold of it. Now, how many people work full-time in the White House comms department? It has to be dozens, probably, right? And I'm guessing each and every one of them probably makes a better salary than I do. But when they put all their heads together and combine all of the formidable intellectual acumen and academic credentials they possess amongst themselves, the best workaround they could come up with was to say that Joe was actually referring to some benign skin lesion he had removed sometime during the 80s, and that's supposed to reassure us? Is this your final answer, Baghdad? Are you sure you don't want to phone a friend? Now, maybe this is just me, but when the man with the nuclear codes in his pocket is confusing I currently have cancer with my doctor cut a mole off my arm during my physical in 1986, that does not fill me with an abundance of confidence. Not that I was operating from an abundance of confidence in the first place, but you get the point. In fact, I think that explanation is actually a hell of a lot worse than just saying the president misspoke and leaving it at that. You can just leave it at that. You can't put lipstick on every single pig in Joe Biden's barnyard, especially not with the current pig lipstick supply chain crisis. So just tell the truth. Just say it was sunny and warm out because climate change, so the president unfortunately misspoke because he is secretly a wax mannequin and he was beginning to melt. But I think my favorite response was the response by the fake news media performance artists, who responded to history's first presidential cancer disclosure by collectively rolling their eyes and going right back to talking about the January 6th insurrection, the blackest day in all of American history, the day that makes Pearl Harbor look like a fun Sunday breakfast picnic with some friendly Japanese exchange students. But there is so much in that response, implicitly, isn't there? The president says, "I have cancer," during a major policy speech, and the fake news performance artists, the same people who bent over backwards installing this guy in the White House in the first place, who up until a few weeks ago were fully on board with propping up this administration and trying to make it look competent and effective, they just kind of all threw their hands up and said, "Come on, man, he's senile as fuck, you know that. His brain is tapioca pudding. What do you want from us? Let's just move on to the news that really matters, like identifying the culprit who almost raped AOC on January 6th. And I guess I have to speak on that before I move on to Joe having the Kung flu. I would not have thought it possible that Sandy Cortez would figure out a way to work the "I was almost raped" card into a story about her pretending to be hauled off in handcuffs. But that is the last time I will underestimate the ability of this young woman to make the entire world revolve around her vagina. Because what was her response to the chorus of very well-deserved mockery that greeted her fake perp walk the other day? Well, she calmly tweeted out that because she, Sandy Cortez, claims to be a sexual assault survivor, if you make fun of her for pretending to be hauled off in handcuffs, that means you like rapists. And that is a real thing. I am not in any way making that up. If it was a parody, you could not write it. It would be too absurd. It would be too inconceivable. I like to think of myself as a pretty fair satirist, but I couldn't compete with that. I would feel like a three-legged chihuahua trying to race a greyhound. Sometimes you just have to bow down like Wayne and Garth and say, "I am not worthy." The parody of my imagination can never compete with the real-world self-parody that you do every day. But back over to the presidential health desk. One day after the stunning announcement that he is currently suffering from cancer because it rained crude oil in Delaware in the 1950s, and 5 days after he coughed, sniffed, and spluttered through an address at the airport in Tel Aviv in which he admonished the Israeli people on Israeli soil that they should do more to honor the Holocaust, President and half-melted wax mannequin Joe Biden was confirmed to be infected with the coof. And he of course made the obligatory hostage video in which you're required to say, I am so very happy that I got the 2 vaccines and the 4 boosters because I got the damn virus anyway, but damn it, everybody should still get vaxxed and boosted because I'm sure it would have been a lot worse if I was one of those unvaxxed leper redneck hillbillies out there in flyover country. And isn't it fun how they've turned the utter failure of the vaccine into an unfalsifiable positive claim? 1 year ago yesterday, exactly 365 days prior to the disclosure of his own infection, Joe Biden said on the record, "You will not get the virus if you've had these vaccinations." And Tony Fauci was running around to every TV camera in the Metro DC area saying the same thing. The vaccines are so good, so effective, so wonderful at preventing infection. That is why we have to mandate them. Now, fast forward to today, and Tony Fauci, he's had COVID twice, which, if I'm keeping score at home, is 1 more time than my unvaccinated ass has had it. But don't pay any attention to that, because there's one thing Tony Fauci is good at, and that is moving the goalposts. So here he sits and lies with a straight face and says, the vaccines, they were never supposed to prevent infection. What would make you think that? Just because I was on TV 26 hours a day saying exactly that same thing for over a year, clearly you do not understand science. The vaccines are all about reducing the severity of your symptoms when you inevitably get infected by the virus. It may have sounded like I was saying the opposite of that thing before, but that is your fault for not being smart enough to understand my very sophisticated scientific vernacular. And sure, maybe I actually haven't practiced medicine since 1979. Sure, maybe I switched specialties and became a virologist at age 40 just so I could get my current job. Maybe I thus have never spent one single day of my life working as a practicing virologist. But I will have you know I am America's top infectious disease expert, and you can ask any of my very close friends in the news media about that. But not Chris Cuomo, because they fired his goofy ass. Even CNN was embarrassed by that guy. And that says a lot. When you get fired, but the guy who jacks off in front of his colleagues during a work meeting keeps his job, that's a tough one. But I don't want to close out the week without talking about something happy and uplifting here. And does it get more happy and uplifting than when Donald Trump says he is going to start his next term in office by firing a minimum of 50,000 federal bureaucrats? And I guess he still hasn't officially announced his candidacy yet, but who cares? I think I may have actually swooned when I read that story this morning. It's possible I also heard choirs of angels singing in my head. I'm not sure. But talk about music to one's ears. But at the same time, let us not pretend that culling 50,000 people from the ranks of the existing bureaucracies is anything more than a fairly decent start. There is still lots more work to do after that. I have stated previously my belief that you could reduce the size of the central government by fully 1/4. And not only would it not harm anything, it would be a net positive. How many assistant deputy undersecretaries of paper shuffling do we really need to have? Remember when the media were all horrified by the number of positions that Trump was leaving unfilled? And then they asked him about it, and he basically said, why do I have to hire 4 guys to do a one-man job? I thought I was supposed to be saving the taxpayers' money and not just filling jobs because they happen to exist? And of course it is just those sorts of attitudes that cause the establishment to view Trump, correctly, as an existential threat to their way of life. And there's a larger point there too, I think, which goes directly to the failure of the Republican Party to be an actual agent of conservatism and an actual champion of the views of conservative Americans. Philosophically, the attitude has been for a long time that if we just maintain a certain distance from the craziest radical leftists, then that means we automatically have conservative street cred. And the result of that has been that you get a Republican Party today that is to the left of 2008 Barack Obama. The other half of that attitude is the refusal to roll back the damage the other guys have done when you get back into power. At the current pace, at the end of Joe Biden's term, he will have allowed around 9 million illegal aliens into the country. And those are just the ones we know about. That is in addition, of course, to the 20 to 30 million who were here already. So at the end of 2024, it's entirely possible that illegal aliens will be 10% of the U.S. population. But when the Republicans get back into power, the act always looks the same. They'll pay lip service to border security. They'll talk a big game about being opposed to drug cartels and human smuggling and whatnot. But when the topic turns to actually going around and finding and deporting all of the many millions of illegal aliens the previous administration let in, that's when the Republicans turn all into a bunch of little sissy girly men. Oh, we can't go rounding people up. That's not who we are. Well, I'm sorry. That needs to be who we are. Immigration enforcement means enforcing immigration law. If you know you've got 20 or 30 million in the country illegally or more, that means you have got a hell of a lot of work to do. This is one area where Trump was a disappointing president. I would hope this changes in a second term, and I suspect that it probably will, because he's going to be going in with his eyes wide open this time. He got off on the wrong foot in 2017 by giving the media Democrat complex too much credit. He figured, and he said this to Bob Woodward, that once he had won the election and taken office, he thought everybody would leave the rancor of the campaign behind them and give him a fair chance to prove himself as the president. But as we know, the opposite thing happened. They dialed up the hatred and vitriol to 11, and they kept it there. For God's sake, they're currently fake impeaching the guy for a third time, a year and a half after he's been out of office. And if that is not a healthy, unhealthy obsession, I do not know what is. But I'm liking more and more the idea of a second Trump term where he has no illusions about what he is up against, where he does not have to concern himself with being reelected, where he has had 4 years to reflect on the things he did right and the things he could have done better. And he's got a crystal clear understanding of what the country requires of him during his last 4 years of public service. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and we will leave it there for this week. Here is wishing everyone a pleasant, edifying weekend. Thank you very much for watching. See you Monday. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.